I'm not going to be able to own property because of the color of my skin. I'm not going to be able to go to the school I want to because of the color of my skin. And that list of inequities and inequalities goes on and on and on. And I hope that for folks who have never had to question their own place in this world and question whether or not they're going to be pulled over by the police because of the color of their skin, I hope that those people will take time to just really sit back and think, wow, maybe I do have a bit of privilege, even if I can't quite see that.
Absolutely. Great perspective, for sure. You know, I don't know how much of the trial you watched. I watched bits and pieces, of course, while being at work and catching the headlines and trying to stay up of what I missed inside the courtroom. And the testimony day to day, no matter who was on the stand, it was heart-wrenching. I remember hearing from the employee from Cup Foods, and he is a young man, maybe 22 years old, and he broke down saying that maybe this would have never happened if I didn't call the police. And so it's interesting where the blame, where the self-blame came through in this, and people that were in George Floyd's car the day of that incident. And so I think to hear these people almost a year later, to hear them recount this and what they're dealing with today is remarkable.
Well, and I think that having these stories come to light, the beginning is always a conversation, right? So even if there is someone who is posting something on social media that maybe they don't quite realize is racist, you know, you don't have to post racist things. If you repost them, or if you repost posts from racist people, then you're sort of implicated, right? But I think that we all have an opportunity to reach out, grab each other by the hand, and talk to one another, right?
Absolutely. Great way to do it. And as we are waiting the verdict, we're going to send things over now to the newsroom in Studio A with Keith and Lauren standing by for the latest.
Hey there, Derek, Courtney. Yes, indeed, a very big day, not just in Minneapolis, but also here in Houston, because George Floyd was a Houston native. And so we know that there are so many of his family members, former classmates. He was a member and a classmate at Houston Yates High School, was part of a state championship football team. And so he is still known and loved by many people in this community. And so there was a connection that none of us wanted to have to that particular story, but he was the connection.
Right, a Houston native, he certainly was. Again, we're just waiting right now. The jury is telling the judge they have reached a verdict in this case. Only about 10 hours of deliberations, a little over 10 hours of deliberations, and so we're waiting. Around 3:30 is when we expect to hear that verdict. NBC is going to be doing a special report a little bit beforehand, leading up to that. We do have crews not only in Minneapolis, but also here in Houston. We have Chris Gutierrez, who we've already heard from there on the streets in Minneapolis, just outside of that courthouse. Our Brandon Walker, also in Minneapolis, covering this trial. Our Taisha Walker is covering it from here in Houston. We're going to be talking to her. She is at the George Floyd mural that is here in Houston. And I think the speed of the verdict has really surprised everyone, not only from the national level, also in Minneapolis, but here in Houston as well. We were talking and certainly weren't expecting a verdict this soon, maybe by the end of the week, maybe sometime next week. But like you said, just a little over 10 hours of deliberations. As Chris told us, the jurors, 7 women, 5 males, 6 of them are white, 4 black, 2 multiracial. And what Derek Chauvin is facing is a second-degree murder charge, a third-degree murder charge, and a second-degree manslaughter charge. And he could be convicted on all 3, could be a combination of those 3, and he could be found, of course, not guilty as well. And so, in Minnesota, they have been preparing for a while for this, 3,000 National Guardsmen in town. And they also have schools that went all virtual this week because they wanted to make sure kids weren't in school because they didn't know what the reaction would be after this verdict is read. And we're not going to know it now for another 20 minutes still, but they were prepared. Yeah, so we do want to go to our Brandon Walker. We mentioned he is in Minneapolis. He's been there for a few days covering this trial for us. We want to go to him now and get the very latest on what he's seeing and hearing there in the streets of Minneapolis. Brandon?
Yeah, Lauren and Keith, where we are is at 38th and Chicago, better known now as George Floyd Square. This is where Mr. Floyd took his last breaths, where he was pronounced dead. You walk with me here at this intersection, you can see that people are beginning to gather, members of the media, but also members of this community who want to be here where Mr. Floyd took his last breaths as they await this verdict. Anticipation is the word here, an unnerved anticipation, that is, Lauren and Keith, as they wait for jurors to render a decision. And as you take a look at this memorial, the flowers, the pictures, the other mementos, people have been coming here for a year now, but people have been coming here throughout the day to leave these flowers, some of them leaving with tears in their eyes. I want to draw your attention to the cup foods just in the immediate background there, where you see that picture of Mr. Floyd, where you see the flowers and other mementos of memoriam, is where he died, with that knee on his neck for 9 minutes, 29 seconds, as it came out in testimony throughout the course of this very emotional trial. That's the crux of the prosecution's argument. As we've told you here throughout our reporting, 9 minutes, 29 seconds on Mr. Floyd's neck as he pleaded with Officer Chauvin to get off his neck because he couldn't breathe, calling for his mother throughout the process. The prosecution argues that that alone proves that Mr. Chauvin didn't care. He disregarded Mr. Floyd's feelings, his health, his condition at that point.
County Government Center. This is the courthouse where the verdict is expected to be read. I'm actually joined, Lester, by Philippe Cunningham. He is a council member in Minneapolis, and I've spoken with you, Philippe, many times since the death of George Floyd. And if you can put this into context for us, for our viewers, how significant is this moment right now?
I mean, this moment is hugely significant, not only here in Minneapolis, but also across the
Gabe,
country.
I hate to interrupt. My apologies to the councilman. The court is back in session. You're looking at Derek Chauvin. They're standing as the jury now is led into the courthouse. Of course, we have not, and we will not see the jury, but all the participants and spectators are standing right now
Please be seated.
they take their seats.
Members of the jury, I understand you have a verdict. Members of the jury, I will now read the verdicts as they will appear in the permanent records of the 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota, County of Hennepin, District Court, 4th Judicial District. State of Minnesota Plaintiff versus Derek Michael Chauvin, Defendant. Verdict, Count 1. Court File Number 27, CR 20-12646. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 1, unintentional second-degree murder while committing a felony, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:44 p.m. Signed, Juror Foreperson, Juror number 19. Same caption, verdict Count 2. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 2, third-degree murder, perpetrating an eminently dangerous act, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Signed by Jury Foreperson, Juror number 19. Same caption, verdict Count 3. We, the jury, in the above entitled matter as to Count 3, second-degree manslaughter, culpable negligence, creating an unreasonable risk, find the defendant guilty. This verdict agreed to this 20th day of April 2021 at 1:45 p.m. Jury Foreperson 019. Members of the jury, I'm now going to ask you individually if these are your true and correct verdicts. Please respond yes or no. Juror number 2, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 9, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 19, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 27, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 44, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 52, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 55, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 79, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 85, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 89, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 91, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Juror number 92, are these your true and correct verdicts?
Yes.
Are these your verdicts? So say you one, so say you all.
Yes.
Members of the jury, I find that the verdicts as read reflect the will of the jury and will be filed accordingly. I have to thank you on behalf of the people of the state of Minnesota for not only jury service, but heavy-duty jury service. What I'm going to ask you to do now is to follow the deputy back into your usual room, and I will join you in a few minutes to answer questions and to advise you further. So, all rise for the jury. Be seated. With the guilty verdicts returned, we're going to have Blakely, you may file a written argument as to Blakely factors within 1 week. The court will issue findings on the Blakely factors, the factual findings, 1 week after that. We'll order a PSI immediately returnable in 4 weeks. And we will also have a briefing on, after you get the PSI, 6 weeks from now, and then 8 weeks from now, we will have sentencing. We'll get you the exact dates in a scheduling order. Is there a motion on behalf of the state?
Your Honor, the state would move to have the court revoke the defendant's bail and remand him into custody pending sentencing.
Bail is revoked, bond is discharged, and the defendant is remanded to the custody of the Hennepin County Sheriff. Anything further?
All
right. Thank you.
Derek Chauvin, convicted on all 3 counts, guilty of second-degree unintentional murder, third-degree murder, and second-degree manslaughter in the death of George Floyd, and leaving the courtroom in handcuffs.
We're adjourned.
Chauvin remanded in the custody of the sheriff in anticipation of his sentencing. Now, 8 weeks from now, we want to go right to NBC's Gabe Gutierrez outside the courthouse. Gabe, describe the reaction.
Lester, just an incredible reaction here. A few moments ago, this entire crowd erupted in cheers. They started chanting all 3 counts. And the reaction can best be summarized by Bree Graham. She's the woman I spoke with just before this verdict was read, who told us that she had been traumatized watching this trial. Bree, what is your reaction? And when that verdict was read, what went through your head?
I honestly, I don't really have the words for it right now, and I'm trying to take everything in. And it feels like we can take the day to celebrate that we're finally getting a taste of justice. And then tomorrow we move on to Dante, and we keep doing this until they give us what we need across the board, you know?
Bree, a few moments ago, I saw you you started crying. It was emotional for not just you, but many folks here. Explain to me a little bit more about, what did you have doubts leading into this verdict? How much anticipation, how worried were you about this?
Of course I had doubts. We have doubts every time something happens. I mean, we have doubts when the police say that he's unarmed and, Adam Toledo had his hands up. We have doubts when they lie about what the cameras are. We always have doubts, and this was definitive and this was solidified, and we finally got the justice that we needed. People see it on the news and they don't understand, but living here and breathing this energy in every single day, it's so much, and it finally feels like the smoke has cleared just a tiny bit, enough just to take a deep breath,
Bree, tell our viewers a little bit about yourself. You were telling me you're 31 years old. You've lived in Minneapolis for how long? 10 years?
Yeah, over 10 years in St. Paul and Minneapolis, and this is what I would call home. My friends are here, some of my most important families here.
Incredibly significant moment. I'm glad we were able to share this with you, Bree. Thank you so much for talking with us.
Yeah.
And again, we appreciate your time. Lester, what she told me is something we saw unfold here just within the last few minutes. If we can look around, this is the demonstrators that had gathered here. They all gathered close together to watch the verdict unfold live on their cell phones. And they all gathered in small groups, and some of the feeds came in just a few seconds before the others. Different people were yelling guilty on that first count. And then I think once the second and the third count came in, guilty, there was just a wave that just rippled across this crowd. And I think if I could sum it up in one word, Lester, it is relief. relief from a crowd that had been waiting for this verdict for months, relief from a community that had seen razor wire and barricades and boarded up buildings just engulf downtown Minneapolis, relief from people like Bree Graham, who did not know what would happen and who told us how this is something she'd been waiting for. And now the question becomes, is this just about George Floyd? What about Daunte Wright? What about other police encounters that are still very much on the minds of the demonstrators here? But again, Lester, if I had to sum up what I just saw in the last few moments, it would be relief. Back to you.
Gabe, thank you for just joining us. Guilty on all counts against Derek Chauvin, who watched the jury or looked out toward the judge, his eyes darting, but a very serious, focused look as he heard those counts, all three verdicts read against him. And as we noted, he is now in the custody of the county sheriff there and will remain in custody pending his sentencing 8 weeks from now. Let's turn to criminal defense attorney and NBC News legal analyst Danny Cevallos. Danny, obviously a huge effort on the part of the prosecution in this case, more than 40 witnesses, and they were victorious today.
They were, and I'm sure that if you talk to any of the prosecutors moments before the verdict was read, none of them felt it was a sure thing. None of them felt they had a layup. None of them thought it was a slam dunk, and they shouldn't. I mean, because they always have the burden, the highest burden in our law, beyond a reasonable doubt. They know that it only takes one juror, and it only really takes reasonable doubt about a single element of a crime. So for that reason, that's why you saw so many witnesses paraded through. But the prosecution was very methodical. They had witnesses that went to the emotion of the jurors, witnesses that spoke to the science, that spoke to the use of force. And as we can see, that presentation was very effective, and possibly even that final rebuttal by the prosecution, which was a little more passionate and ended with that memorable line about Derek Chauvin's heart being too small. Not that George Floyd's heart was too large, Derek Chauvin's heart too small. Might have left a real mark on the jury as they went into deliberations. They might have been thinking about that throughout their relatively short deliberations. But as I said, in the grand scheme of deliberations, this was relatively long. But of course, in a high-profile trial, all the rules go out the window.
All right, Danny, thank you. I think we're looking at a shot from outside the food mart where that fatal, awful encounter occurred. Here we are. That's on the streets where there's been an ongoing memorial to George Floyd since all this happened last year, and where people now are gathering to mark this moment. Many people here had stood and called for justice, and justice certainly played out in a courtroom a few moments ago with the verdict in this case, the sentencing to follow. NBC News contributor Eddie Glaude and NBC News political analyst Eugene Robinson join me now. Gentlemen, reflect on what changes or maybe what doesn't change in the Black Lives Matter movement as a result of this.
Well, I can...
Go ahead, Jim.
I should have picked one of you. I apologize. I can start. I just exhaled for the first time in more than an hour since we learned we were going to have a verdict. And one of my first thoughts was, it shouldn't have been this hard, right? He knelt on the man's neck for 9 minutes and 29 seconds, choking the life out of him, and it was all caught on video from multiple angles. And we should have, I think, had been able to have confidence that. That sort of thing was not allowed, was not acceptable, not an acceptable kind of policing in this country. And it says something about this country and where we've been, and hopefully where we're going. That in fact, I was very unsure as to what this quick verdict meant, and whether it meant they had completely disregarded the prosecution case or completely disregarded the defense case, and what it meant. I think this will be seen as gratifying by a lot of people, and as more of a beginning or a signpost than an end. It's we haven't reached our destination on the racial reckoning that we need to have in this country. But I think this will be seen as a step forward, and as opposed to what it potentially could have been seen as, which would have been a giant step back.
Eddie?
Well, wow. So look, the first thing I want to say is that the jurors recognize that George Floyd's life mattered. And that's important, because for so long in this country, African Americans, black folk, poor folk, brown folk have had to live under the conditions of generalized disregard. So that's the first thing. The second thing is that we must understand that justice is a practice, not an end. Justice is a practice, not an end. So we get justice in this case, but we know that we have to do something fundamental to change the nature of policing in this country. So now the hard work begins. We have this moment. Yes, and I'm relieved, thank God, that the jurors of his peers decided that Derek Chauvin committed a wrong, that he committed murder on 3 counts. But we have the hard work to continue to build. As Eugene said, this is just the beginning. We're in an interregnum. The country is still trying to imagine who we will be moving forward, Lester. But let me tell you this, my stomach isn't in knots anymore.
Eddie, I look at this crowd, and I look at the crowd we showed outside the Food Mart, and there's no celebration. What I'm seeing, and maybe I'm reading it, is just relief, a sense of validation, but certainly no joy. And how can there be joy in the loss of a life and all that's transpired? But it's just something I note as I look at across these crowds.
Yeah, it's relief. It's exhaustion. It's grief. It's worry, it's concern, right? We're still in the middle of a pandemic. And we still have Dante Wright. We still have the officers that he tried, along with the other officers who participated in the death of George Floyd. So this is a moment of relief, but again, we have a long way to go. We are in that moment of transition. So we can at least breathe, at least for a moment, before we take the next step.
Gentlemen, thank you, Eddie and Eugene. Let me go to Kristen Welker at the White House. And as we've been noting throughout our coverage today, the White House watching all this very carefully. Any still plans, Kristen Welker, for the president to make some remarks?
It's my understanding, Lester, that preparations are underway for President Biden to make remarks. We're expecting those remarks to take place sometime this evening. What specifically will he say? That remains to be seen. But one White House official says he will call for peaceful protest.